what's up everybody? John the Morgile here. Hope y'all are having a blessed day. Going to do a video response to this Professor Dave Explains channel. I'll put a link in the description to the original video, which is entitled "The Earth is Definitely Not Flat." Now, I was hoping to find or hear some decent new arguments for the spinning ball Earth, or perhaps some good arguments against the flat and stationary Earth, but I can't say that I'm surprised. Basically, Professor Dave does nothing except for attempt to debunk his own personal, fictional version of flat Earth, as opposed to actually debunking the points that prove the Earth is flat and motionless. So we'll get right into it, but I will just say it's just more of the same. Regurgitation of the stuff we've been hearing since we were very small, and we'll just go ahead and destroy every single point that he makes in this 15-minute video. Well, his video was 15 minutes. I can't say that mine will be 15 minutes, but I'll try to keep it as short and concise as possible. I hope that you enjoy, and here we go.
It's Professor Dave, and I want to show you the world.
Professor Dave Explains.
Throughout this astronomy series, we've learned quite a bit about every object you could hope to see in the night sky, as well as many others that you can't. So how does all of this fit in with the understanding held by the common public? For one thing, just the way that an understanding of chemistry and biochemistry makes it easy to refute things like alternative medicine, the understanding of astronomy we have just gained will make it easy to refute similarly alternative cosmological models.
So right off the bat, he's categorizing astronomy, which is very much theoretical ponderings and nothing scientific at all about astronomy, categorizing that with medicine, which medicine is something tangible. You can scientifically analyze outcomes of different medications, and of course I will wholeheartedly disagree with him that alternative medicines are essentially a waste of time, useless, which is what he implied there, and that internal medicine, pharmacopoeia, is the only way to go when it comes to medicine. So I disagree there, but at least, when it comes to internal medicine and pharmaceuticals, there is at least some physical science behind that. And this is a very common sleight of hand, and whether he's doing this intentionally or not, I doubt it. But to categorize medicine with astronomy or astrophysics it's a false equivalency, right? Nobody's ever going to travel to the stars and verify their distance, size, makeup, any of that. And this is a big problem. Theoretical astrophysics and astronomy hides behind the name of science, but if anyone actually believes that there's anything scientific about astronomy, well, they really haven't thought this through. So right off the bat, completely disagree with his tactics and his point. So let's continue.
Most notably, the present fad that is the flat Earth model. There exists a community of folks who believe that, contrary to everything the human species has learned over the past few centuries, the world is not spherical, but is instead flat, and is also the center of the universe.
I will say that flat Earth is not a fad. This is something that is not going away. It's only getting bigger because we flat earthers are doing very hard work to wake people up to this truth. And I would also say that it is not a belief. Tangibly, physically measuring the Earth yields results that show no curvature as well as no motion. And both of these things are necessary in the ball Earth theory. You have to have curvilinear orbital rotational motion, which should be measurable, and you also should have curvature to the Earth. And again, when you measure for these things, these necessary staples of the ball Earth theory, there's no evidence for it. Also, I love how he puts the flat Earth in space, which is antithetical to reality. The idea of infinite space is not compatible with flat Earth. Visible space is apparently in a plane above us, not in all directions around us. The stars are not light years away, but are apparently relatively close by, local. And so this just depicts his misconceptions about flat Earth. So I guess it's easy to debunk something that, well, you misrepresent and don't fully understand. But of course, this is oh so typical when it comes to ball earthers who try and debunk flat Earth by taking their misconceptions and misunderstandings, their personal understandings of flat Earth, and attacking that basically like a straw man argument. And I got to tell you, this video is just chock full of that sort of tactic, if you can even call it a tactic. The imagery and some of the arguments that he uses in this video clearly show that this person is juxtaposing the heliocentric or standard model onto flat Earth. So you've got like a disk flying around in infinite space. Whereas in reality, the Earth is the physical plane. And as far as we know, it is the only physical plane. Nobody has ever truly circumnavigated the world north to south. So, like starting, say, somewhere near the equator, heading south to Antarctica, continuing south along that longitude line, crossing over the South Pole or somewhere near there, and continuing along the anti-meridian line where they started, up around back to the North Pole, crossing over the North Pole, and continuing along to the original meridian line to wind up back where they started. When you look at the attempts of people to circumnavigate the world north to south, basically they cheat. They'll go down to somewhere close to the Arctic Circle and basically turn around and come back the way that they came. And as far as east to west circumnavigation of the Antarctic, you've got things like the Antarctica Cup Challenge, which adheres mainly to the 40 and 50 degrees south latitude. They admittedly don't even approach the Arctic Circle. Technically, that would be illegal under the Antarctic Treaty. However, if you look at like the North Pole, it has indeed been circumnavigated east to west. People cross over the North Pole, I wouldn't say routinely, but it happens extremely frequently compared to South Polar circumnavigation. Now, you would expect to see similar numbers and attempts of circumnavigation in the far south compared to the far north, yet there are only just a handful of instances in history where people even claim to circumnavigate the South Pole. And if you research and really actually dig into these, it becomes clear that the South Pole is, you can't circumnavigate it. And this does indeed lend credence to the azimuthal equidistant, or AE, projection sort of layout of the world. Now, of course, the AE projection does get a lot of flack by flat earthers for a couple of seemingly legitimate reasons, but upon further examination, it becomes clear that the problems with the AE projection are more perceived problems due to a lack of information. We do not have the surveying data in the far south as we do in the far north. Throughout history, all of astronomy was born and grew up in the northern hemisphere, or central semiplane, if you will. And so it has been assumed historically that you have this sort of bilateral symmetry north of the equator and south of the equator. So you would expect the, say, 60 degrees south latitude to be equal in terms of length around, assuming a globe, to the northern 60 degrees latitude. And yet, if you look at the accounts of mariners who spent, in many cases, substantial chunks of their lives attempting to circumnavigate the far south, east to west or west to east, you'll find that they were unsuccessful and found it impossible to circumnavigate all the way around the Antarctic Circle. For more information on that, take a look at Zetetic Astronomy. I've got the audio book uploaded onto my channel. It is an entire, I do have the entire audio book as a playlist, but I'll put a card to the specific section that covers the topic of far southern circumnavigation by mariners in centuries past.
A knee-jerk reaction to this is often one of disbelief and even mockery. But rather than go that route, let's consider this model in a rigidly academic way. Whether the Earth is flat or round, we should be able to demonstrate it and show how all astronomical phenomena make sense in one model versus the other. Let's go through some of these phenomena now and put them into context. First, let's just look at the celestial sphere. We look up and we see stars and planets going around. The flat Earth model says we stay still while everything goes around us, and the round Earth model says we rotate, which is what causes the apparent motion of objects in the sky. At face value, with no further investigation, these are two completely valid hypotheses. Either of them could feasibly explain what we see in the sky. Now let's dig a little deeper. What are some details we notice about the celestial sphere and certain earthly phenomena? We experience night and day, alternating periods of light and dark that change over time. We see the ecliptic. This is the part of the sky that traces the sun's path throughout the year, as well as the paths of all the planets. The path of the sun follows a slowly tilting pattern that lasts 1 year. This length of time also outlines other cycles observed on Earth, which we call the seasons. These seasons go a particular way in the northern hemisphere and the opposite way in the southern hemisphere. There exists a phenomenon called the Coriolis effect, whereby rotating masses like storms rotate in one direction in the northern hemisphere and the other direction in the southern hemisphere. Each hemisphere also sees an entirely different collection of stars. These are just a handful of the observations we can make that beg to be explained. Here is where the round Earth becomes obvious.
Okay, so we're going to get into each one of those points individually, but to me it's really laughable that the common approach to measuring the Earth is to look at the stars, right? So I love to use the analogy in order to get the dimensions of a pool table. You really want to measure the pool balls, right? So pool balls are spherical, therefore pool tables must be spherical too. It really is laughable to gaze at the stars in order to glean what the Earth is doing. But that is the standard approach, and if you can possibly physically measure the Earth itself for curvature and rotation and orbital motion, and be honest with yourself, you will inevitably become a flat earther.
All we have to do is understand that the Earth is roughly spherical, spinning on an axis tilted somewhat from the vertical, and going around the sun, just like all the other planets. This singular assumption makes all of the observations fall into place.
Except when you measure for the necessary acceleration that would be accompanied by rotating and spinning, you can't find it.
The sun, just like all the other planets. This singular assumption makes all of the observations fall into place. As Earth rotates, it's daytime when facing the sun and nighttime when facing away from the sun. The apparent motion of all these celestial objects utilizes elliptical paths and can therefore be predicted. The seasons occur because of the amount of sunlight hitting one hemisphere versus the other at any given time in Earth's orbit.
Of course, the apparent position of the sun changes throughout the year. During the northern summer, the sun is closer to the Tropic of Cancer. During the southern summer, the sun is closer to the Tropic of Capricorn. This is observable, and yes, it takes a year. But to say that the seasons are somehow exclusive to the ball Earth just goes to show the lack of research that this person has done into flat Earth, because the seasons work in either model.
1 year is also no longer an arbitrary amount of time. It's equal to one revolution of the Earth around the sun, and the differing lengths of night and day are also explained by the tilt in the rotational axis.
Okay, but on the other hand, the seasons are just as well explained by the variable path of the sun from season to season.
The Coriolis effect is just the result of simple physics related to rotating bodies like the Earth. The hemispheres have different skies because they point out at different regions of space. Everything we see makes perfect sense with one simple, unifying assumption. That's what science is all about. In the flat Earth model, all of these observations require their own separate explanations. What is night and day? If you try to place a luminous object like the sun above a plane like the flat Earth, how does light reach half the plane and not the other half? Say you come up with a mechanism whereby light dissipates appropriately. How does this then fit with other observations?
Okay, so since the sun is a local object, it's not millions of miles away, it's relatively close, the operation of perspective comes into play here. So as the sun travels away from you, as in like setting at night, it is going beyond the vanishing point. But you also have atmospheric refraction, which comes into play here, that aids in the rising and the setting of the sun. So that answers the question. It's perspective and refraction. Light does not travel in straight line paths through the atmosphere, and as the sun gets further away from you laterally, as in setting, the light is essentially bent down towards the ground so that you no longer can see the sun. It's really quite simple.
What are the seasons? If you try to explain them by pulling the sun closer and farther from the Earth, how can it be winter in the north and summer in the south?
Well, again, this has to do with the average amount of sunlight that either semiplane or hemisphere receives. The sun makes an annual pass from Capricorn to Cancer and back over the course of a year. When it's overhead of Capricorn, it's southern summer. When it's overhead of Cancer, it's northern summer. And when it's overhead of the equator, it is the equinox, fall or spring. And so this is explained in either scenario. It's not exclusive to a ball. And the flat Earth definitely has the seasons explained.
What is the Coriolis effect? If Earth is a plane, what magically alters the rotation of a storm in one half of the plane compared to the other?
There's nothing magical about it. This is a basic element of fluid dynamics. As a fluid is perturbed, like taking a cupped hand through water, or taking an oar through the water, or even the atmosphere being perturbed by the sun heating the atmosphere in a path around the Earth, you get counter-rotational cyclonic forces north or south of the sun, or on either side of a cupped hand or an oar through the water. It's nothing magical, fluid dynamics, and Coriolis effect has nothing to do with it.
Shouldn't we also all be seeing the same night sky, since our lines of sight all face the same direction?
No, we cannot see the entire night sky due to, again, the operation of perspective as well as refraction. So the stars that appear to be close to the horizon are on the same plane, more or less, than the stars that are overhead, but they are laterally distant from you, and so therefore, obeying the operation of perspective will get closer and closer, apparently, towards the horizon. And again, the refraction of the light from the celestial light sources aids in their dropping towards the horizon as lateral distance is gained.
Flat Earth subscribers do actually attempt to answer all of these questions, but beyond the fact that the explanations are never mathematically or logically sound, the sheer fact that each phenomenon requires its own independent explanation makes it unscientific.
That's absolutely not true. The celestial light sources adhere to the laws of perspective. They also are perturbed by refraction. There is no need for multiple explanations. Celestial light sources are situated in a singular plane, more or less above us, and so the more distant an object or a light source is from you laterally, the closer towards the horizon it will appear. And yet again, refraction aids in this, or exacerbates it.
If we invent a luminous sun-like object and start tracing elaborate paths through the sky, this is just the epicycles from the geocentric model all over again. It's assumption upon assumption, adjustment upon adjustment, all of which are totally ad hoc, based in nothing but an attempt to fit observation. This is very poor science.
When the geocentric epicycles theory was put together, the understanding of refraction did not exist. Refraction of light was not scientifically acknowledged until the 1600s. And so I think that this solves a lot of the problems with the epicycles that were purported by, I believe, Ptolemy.
When we say the Earth is round and put the Sun at the center of all this motion, not only are all of these phenomena easy to explain, even to a layperson, but predictions can be made. In 2017, a total solar eclipse occurred over the United States. Using a modern understanding of astronomy, we can do math to predict any such event, like eclipses, the return of Halley's Comet, or anything else. This is done very simply with the Sun at the center and using Kepler's laws regarding elliptical orbits, which involves basic algebra accessible to anyone. Only in this model is the math so easy. So when we operate under this framework and say that a solar eclipse is going to happen at this time, on this day, in this place, and then it does match our prediction with extreme precision, there can be no clearer vindication for this model of the solar system.
The prediction of eclipses is based on observation, so regardless of which model you use, eclipses can be predicted. Now, since we're on the topic of eclipses, let's not forget the major discrepancy in the ball-Earth theory in terms of eclipses. Okay, so in order for the moon to cast a shadow upon the Earth that is sometimes just a couple miles in diameter, and usually about 75 miles in diameter, the shadow of the moon must be tapering off into a point proportionally with distance from the moon. Now, it is claimed by the ball-Earth theory that the moon is a 1,000-mile diameter object, and light and shadow simply do not behave as such, where shadows will taper off into a point. So in order to solve this issue, the globe Earth theory has come up with this bizarre and peculiar behavior of light, where the light from the sun is converging upon itself at some point in space, then diverging from itself at that point. And this hypothetically explains how the shadow of the moon can diminish in angular size with distance from the moon. Now, this flies in the face, completely contradicts the method used by Eratosthenes to estimate the circumference of the hypothetically spherical Earth. In order for his numbers to work, the light from the sun must be reaching the Earth at parallel angles to one another, certainly not divergent angles. So this is a huge discrepancy, which either you can have one or the other, but you can't have both. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot have the light from the sun approaching the Earth at divergent angles in order to explain the diminishing angular size of the moon's shadow, and have the light attacking the Earth at parallel angles in order to justify Eratosthenes' method of estimating the circumference of the Earth using sticks and wells in the Alexandria and Syene experiment that is made famous by globe earthers as a flagship and cornerstone proof of the ball.
Game, set, match. The flat Earth model can never make such predictions, not just because the notion of an eclipse has no logical basis, but also as there is no unifying mathematical system. It's a bunch of separate phenomena with separate explanations, if such explanations even exist.
What's occurring in the heavens is not exactly germane to physical measurements of the Earth, which unanimously show that there is no curvature nor any motion to the Earth. Certainly not supersonic, hypersonic, and even ludicrous motion, curvilinear motion no less, in terms of these orbital trajectories that are purported by the ball-Earth theory. We would be able to measure these motions, these orbital trajectories and rotational motions that have never even been remotely measured, detected at all. And again, when you measure the Earth for curvature, there is absolutely no indication that the Earth has the necessary curvature to result in an overall sphere. So whatever's going on in the heavens is secondary to physical measurements that we can confirm.
It doesn't end there. The flat Earth model has a huge laundry list of other things to explain besides what we have mentioned so far. Everything we see in space is a sphere. Why is Earth the only thing that isn't?
Again, the lights in the night sky are simply not the Earth, And so whether or not this night sky is filled with lots of spheres, that does absolutely not make the Earth a sphere. This is a logical fallacy that is pretty typical among globe earthers, but again, this is tantamount to measuring pool balls in order to get the dimensions of a pool table. As I mentioned earlier, just because pool balls are spherical does not therefore make pool tables spherical, and it's the exact same argument. By saying that the sky is filled with spheres, therefore the Earth must be a sphere, is just absolutely absurd, non sequitur, broken logic, and what else do we expect from the globe Earth side of this argument?
Things fall to the Earth because of gravity, which attracts things to Earth's center of mass. If Earth is not a sphere, why do things fall to the Earth? What is gravity? The implications run so much deeper than just what rotates around what. Ad hoc solutions are offered, like the idea that the flat Earth is accelerating upwards with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, and that's why we all stick to the ground. But this doesn't help. It actually makes things worse. What is up? What is causing the acceleration? If it is constantly accelerating, we should be traveling the speed of light by now. What is meant to be a simple explanation actually complicates things so much further.
Okay, so this just proves to me that Professor Dave has done absolutely no research into flat Earth. There are no legitimate flat earthers who claim that gravity, in air quotes, is caused by the Earth accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared. What goes up must come down is certainly a thing. We can observe that all day long in reality. If you drop something, it will fall to the ground. However, this is not the same thing as gravity. Gravity is a theory that presupposes that the Earth is a sphere in infinite space-time, and the mass of the Earth is warping the fabric of space-time. Okay, now nowhere in nature can you demonstrate mass being attracted to other mass without some sort of magnetism involved. And so the idea that the spinning ball Earth allows for what goes up must come down to be a thing in reality is absurd. You would expect the opposite if the Earth were in fact a spinning ball. You would expect things to fly off of its edge due to centrifugal force. So gravity is necessary to explain what goes up must come down on the spinning ball Earth. However, on flat Earth, there is no need for it because we live upon the stationary physical plane, and there is an objective up and an objective down. Now, ultimately, it appears that the static electric charge of the Earth is what causes the tendency for high-density objects to fall and relatively lower-density objects and gases to rise above them. This is all dictated by density and buoyancy, and ultimately the static electric charge appears to provide the necessary tendency for high-density objects to find their way down. But for him to say that flat earthers believe the Earth is accelerating upward proves that he stumbled upon the Flat Earth Society's website, found some ridiculous claims made by them, and now he's repeating those claims because it does seem pretty absurd. But again, no legitimate flat earther will ever say that gravity or the fact that what goes up will fall is caused by this sort of phenomenon. The Earth is stationary, fixed, and immovable, has never moved a single yard. That includes no spinning, no orbiting, and certainly no rising up and accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared.
Then there is the matter of the geometrical implications. How do we slice up the globe to make it flat? What places are far away that we thought were close?
Well, the northern hemisphere, or central semiplane, is very similar in either the globe or the azimuthal equidistant sort of layout. Now, the southern hemisphere, or outer semiplane, appears to have some discrepancies relative to the globe. This is why we see very common flight paths in the north and very sparse flight paths in the south. This is why the underwater high-speed internet cables are run like a spider web, all meeting up in the north and jutting out to the periphery in the south. The AE sort of projection layout makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of different pieces of circumstantial evidence that appear to lend credence to the AE projection. However, a model is really not necessary to prove that the Earth is flat and stationary. Simple geometry, simple physics prove that the Earth is flat and stationary without a working model. This is a point that is very hard for globe earthers to understand, although it is definitely the case.
How is it possible to fly or sail around the world, which has indeed been done by so many people?
Circumnavigation is very well explained in the AE projection layout.
Where is the edge of the Earth? Why hasn't anyone seen it?
There may not be an edge. The physical plane may extend infinitely. It could end at some point, but as far as we know, the Antarctic constitutes the periphery in some models, and nobody has ever gone beyond the known realm. That's just all there is to it.
What about all the pictures we have of the Earth from space?
Right, because pictures can't be faked, especially when we're talking about CGI composite images from NASA, right? That could never be faked, ever.
Again, ad hoc solutions are required for all of these questions. It is proposed that a huge ice wall surrounds the Earth, which we call Antarctica. No one can go there because NASA is guarding it.
That's just absurd. In the azimuthal equidistant layout, yes, Antarctica composes the periphery of the flat Earth, although it is protected by the Antarctic Treaty and thousands of miles of icy wasteland. It's not guarded by NASA. It's just inhospitable, inaccessible, and the legal framework of the Antarctic Treaty makes it illegal to bring or store fuel south of 60 degrees south. If you do travel to Antarctica for peaceful scientific research, you are isolated to a singular destination. There is no travel between far southern points, and so it doesn't need to be guarded. It is naturally inaccessible. It's not like you're going to pop into Antarctica on your way to work. But for someone to claim that flat earthers believe NASA is guarding the Antarctic is just absurd.
How? Where is the personnel? Where is the budget for such an operation? NASA also fabricates all of the photos we see. Why? What is the motivation? And how? We have had photos of the Earth from space since the 60s, which predates computer editing software by several decades.
You could make an entire video as to the motivations of NASA and their fakery, but the thing is they have been caught lying for sure, and they continue doing it. One motive would be their budget, over $50 million every single day, or $20 billion a year. They're also, I believe, hiding God, hiding the Creator. And another big motivating factor is the illusion of scarcity. Natural resources like coal, gold, oil, etc. only have high value as long as they are perceived to be scarce. And what better way to create this perceived scarcity than to put us on a finite ball when the Earth may in fact be an infinite plane? But I would say that the burden of proof is not on flat earthers to prove a motive. Measurably, the Earth is flat and stationary. That's the main tenet of the flat Earth movement. So whatever their reasoning is, they surely must have some motivating factors, which I've mentioned a few. But again, it isn't up to us to prove what exactly their motives are. It's enough for us to prove that the Earth has no curvature, is not in motion, and the fact of the matter is they are faking space. Before computer composite imaging, they were using other methods. Matte paintings, filming out circular windows from high altitude crafts. There's lots of ways they could have faked it, and again, it's not up to us to prove exactly how they did it, only that they have indeed been faking space and the ball Earth for whatever reason.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas. See white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth. And you see
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
The logical hole gets deeper and deeper. Because it is impossible to form a consistent framework for these observations, the model must turn to conspiracy. Now, to be clear, I am a firm believer that outside-the-box thinking should be encouraged, and we should always be ready to challenge institutions and governments. But the validity of a conspiracy theory depends largely on how many people have to be in on it. The notion that all the governments and all the scientists and all the airline pilots and flight attendants and communication technology operators and thousands of others are all in on it, it starts to get pretty absurd.
Well, and you're right, that is pretty absurd, although all of those people are not in on it. Every single person in the modern world was convinced of the spinning ball Earth nonsense when they were just gullible children. And everybody goes on believing that nonsense for their entire lives. That includes all the scientists, pilots, etc., etc. Now, there may be a handful of people at organizations like NASA who are actively participating in this deception, but not everyone at NASA even. Probably 99% of the people at NASA have no idea that NASA is a deceptive organization. It isn't necessary for all of those people to be in on the hoax because everybody believes the Earth is a spinning ball anyway. It's part of our basic educational process. So yes, that is pretty crazy, but that's not what flat earthers purport, sir.
The manufacturing of a holographic sphere playing a movie of the heavens, which is operated by unknown entities oppressing mankind into deception and slavery, is really what we are left with for the flat Earth model. And perhaps that realization makes the whole thing make sense. It is the desire to live in a science fiction movie and feel like the hero leading the fight against evil forces that may be the best explanation for the motivations involved with those who insist on this model.
Well, I would just conclude by saying that the Earth is, yet again, measurably flat, without curvature, and stationary, without rotational motion, without orbital motion. If there were curvature, if there were these ludicrous hypersonic trajectories, velocities of the Earth, it would be measurable, it would be obvious. And so the basic tenet of the flat Earth movement is that the Earth is obviously and measurably flat and stationary. If you noticed, the proof of Earth curvature and motion was conspicuously absent from this video, which should speak volumes as to the veracity of his position. Again, we don't need a model, or we don't need to explain the motives of the deception or the motivations behind NASA to perpetuate the deception at the higher levels in order for the Earth to be proven as flat and stationary. The Earth is measurably flat and stationary without these things. So, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to help me continue making content, please consider becoming a channel supporter by making a one-time contribution to PayPal at www.paypal.me/themorguile, or a recurring contribution monthly through Patreon at www.patreon.com/themorguile. I sure could use your support, and God bless you. Thanks so much for your time, and as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody.